a villain!
In this programme, we see two examples of special school pupils accessing the curriculum. The Romeo and Juliet project at Little Stanmore Primary School encourages participation through signing. At Woodland Special School, pupils explore a sense of time with toys from the past in a history lesson. These two North West London schools will soon be co-locating, and we've invited key professionals involved in that process to talk about how they've planned the delivery and evaluation of lessons. They focus on how communication development is crucial to differentiating the curriculum. The discussion is led by Nick Pesey, who is a specialist in inclusion and curriculum development strategies for pupils with special educational needs.
Our curriculum, we heard of the work of Senjit and the Institute of Education and yourself, Nick, and it was having those discussions with you in school that were the kind of sparks of creativity, if you like, that helped us move our thinking on. Rowan class is our early years class. It has pupils in there who are aged, in fact, under 3 up to 6 years plus. They're a group of pupils with fairly high dependency needs who have a severe learning difficulty, but also may be described as having a more profound and multiple learning difficulties in some areas of their functioning. Some people have additional sensory disabilities, physical disabilities, and potentially medical needs as well.
We're looking at the national curriculum and we're pulling out what will make sense for our students. What kind of learning intentions, what kind of activities would be meaningful? How are we going to assess it? Adapting it to our specific population of students that we have here so that students are getting what they need, getting it exposed to a wide variety of subjects. But balanced with that, the individual needs and individual targets are going on all throughout the day across all subjects.
My description of the class, 3 to 6 year olds who may need a little bit more help in their learning, but as all children do, individualised stuff helps get them there.
We introduce the history lesson by having the room darkened so that we can focus on the clock with the torch shining on the clock and the song in the background playing, which is called The Rhythm of the Clock. And that's just our way of cueing that this is now the history lesson. Back to the rhythm, back to the rhythm, back to the ticker to the tone. We always share the lesson planning with the teaching assistants. They have a thorough knowledge of the students, so they're aware of what the learning intentions are, what resources are going to be needed, what strategies are going to be used. Well done, everybody. I saw some really good...
Do you think it's a valid approach to use subjects like this as the context for a whole lot of communication and learning and that sort of thing? Are you happy with that model?
Yes, I am. I think it's challenging for teachers, but I think that, number one, that our students are entitled to be exposed to national curriculum subjects. I mean, we're saying they're necessary for students in mainstream schools, so why wouldn't they be appropriate for our students as well? And I think it gives teachers the challenge of working on those basic skills of communication, for instance, in a lot of different ways.
To signal the start of that lesson. Lights were dimmed, the environment in its whole look completely changed. There was music played consistent to music that happens at the start of a lesson. There was clocks shown to signal that. There was lights very much for the individual child in their face, so that they were having that sort of understanding. And very little language was used, as opposed to, say, in a mainstream classroom where the teacher would say, okay, great, we're going to start with history, and then when, you know, it's toys from the past.
And in history, where we're thinking about things a long, long time ago, at the beginning of every history session, we've been reminding ourselves we're doing toys. You know what I have in here? And for that we use the tap-tap box, where each student has an opportunity to choose a toy out of the tap-tap box, and we will be remarking that that toy is shiny or that toy is soft, describing characteristics of different toys. What's in the box? And Sahand is going to make a choice. What have you got? Can we show everybody? Sahand's got a toy, and it's a toy that, look what it does. We've got a jiggly toy. So we know that some toys are a bit jiggly and tickly, and that toy feels a bit Siv and Finn, not only were they looking, but they were reaching out, and we saw Finn really reacting. And one shake of the tap-tap box, and you could see him just light up and physically react, and he knew what was coming. He was able to anticipate what was coming next. Finn's chosen a little baby doll. Tap, tap, tap. What's in the box? Rookshaw. Rookshaw didn't need very much encouragement. She was constantly looking, and she was engaging verbally, reaching. You choose, that's right. Primarily in the class, my aims will be what each individual student may need.
Can you feel that, Chloe?
Looking perhaps, or listening, or visual tracking, or responding, communicating, all of those basic targets, but it's wrapped up in a history lesson, and if the students are able to pick up concepts around history, that's a great bonus.
Good choice, Rookshaw. I like that toy. All right, who else is ready for a turn? Sorry, Patrick.
Because some of the children have medical needs, you have to judge their involvement in a lesson on how well they're feeling. So Patrick and Arjun's reaction today isn't typical of them, but it's just demonstrating that they're not quite there.
All right.
Today's learning outcome for them was they were encountering history.
Patrick has chosen a toy that's shiny and sparkly.
Working with Stacey as a speech and language therapist in the school around educational aspects, if you like, and curriculum development brings a completely other dimension to the work that we're doing.
Paddy was given the box. He took out a string of beads and he just did this with the beads. And Jill, as the teacher, and Siobhan as a teaching assistant, didn't expect anything more for that, because that fitted into the communication level and the learning intention for that child, which was to encounter an experience.
Sure.
Whereas for Sahand, in the same activity, in the same lesson, was, if you like, more was expected from him. So Jill maybe was expecting that he would make a choice consistently, that he would express preference.
Did you, in the planning process, did you deliberately look at communication issues as a sort of unifying force within the curriculum, within the learning of the students?
We determined, I think, from our experience very, very quickly that communication was going to be a core part of children's learning. It's one of the aims of our school, is enhancing children's communication development. So we knew it had to be there, although we weren't exactly very defined in our thinking at the beginning as to how. Then Stacey and I and Jill and people in school started to have conversations about communication in the curriculum. And Stacey has come up with a kind of framework, Stacey?
Yeah, it's just sort of looking at communication in terms of its development from the very earliest stages all the way through, and trying to have that almost as an overlay to the curriculum, so that every child would be potentially placed on a scale, and then depending on where they are on that scale, the way that you teach them, or the way that you differentiate the curriculum, or the way that they access the curriculum is therefore correlating and relating. And in terms of evaluation, when we set learning intentions for the students, we can tie in, hopefully, the communication development.
What you're describing, the debate in school amongst the teachers and the teaching assistants too, is how to what degree you differentiate the learning intentions. So when you evaluate the lesson on our planning format, do you evaluate for individuals what learning took place from them? I may be shifting my mind towards more highly differentiated learning intentions now.
That we were talking about old toys and new toys.
When it comes time for me to record on my lesson plan, I'll make notes that will refer to my learning intentions. So my first learning intention may have been, for example, for students to handle a variety of old and new toys.
And do you remember we looked at an old toy, and an old toy might be broken, or...
And we were looking at old toys and new toys, and that's when I brought out the new toy in the package, and then the old toy that went into the bin. And Rookshaw was very enthusiastic about putting the old toy into the bin.
Can you do it for us? Thank you, Rookshaw.
Next, we introduced today's lesson, which was looking at a toy that was popular a long time ago, the spinning tops. And we had the opportunity to look at a variety of different kinds of spinning tops.
Finn have a go.
In rowing class, it's a lot about process, not so much product.
Look at that!
So we take a lot of photos during lessons
Really trying.
so that we have some evidence of learning because we may not have the physical things.
Chloe, have a go now, okay?
We look at the photos, we evaluate those, so that's part of our record keeping, so we can see over time that to start with they weren't looking or they weren't touching, and then later on they were touching and looking.
What happens if you touch it? There it goes, right on the floor!
Also with the foundation stage students, occasionally we will do a time sample or we'll do a running record. For 5 minutes or so you'll write down everything that they're doing, and then you evaluate against the foundation stage documents or the lesson plan depending on which key stage they're in.
So evaluation, as far as you're concerned, is very much a collaborative process, with you working with the teaching assistants to decide what progress individuals have made against the learning intention.
Absolutely. The knowledge that the teaching assistants have of each of the students is invaluable.
What's the role of photographs in evaluating a lesson like that, if there is one indeed?
Well, that's a way of collecting evidence of what the students are achieving. In a lesson like that, you could see that the students aren't necessarily creating a product on a piece of paper or creating a project. And what I need to be capturing, which I can only do through video and photo, is that look or that reach or that blink or that smile, or the reactions of that nature.
Were you happy with that lesson? And if so, why were you happy with that lesson?
Yes, I was happy with the lesson, and just briefly because of the responses from the children. Afterwards, I will sit down with the teaching assistants and we'll talk together about what each student did in the lesson, and I'll look at that against the learning intentions, make notes there, and then that will inform what I do in the next lesson. We invited our visitors in to show us their favorite toy that they may have played with a long time ago.
Now who's this that you've got? Is it Elmo? Oh, be gentle with Elmo. Elmo's got big eyes like Rookshaw. Can we show Finn now, Rookshaw?
I think my approach with each student would be slightly different. I might be able, with Rookshaw, to use a bit more verbal language, where with someone else I might need to emphasize my signing or my facial expression or my volume a bit more.
How are you looking, Chloe? You're picking your head up now.
And then we showed them we were looking at spinning tops.
Next week,
We talked about what we'd be doing next week, and that's making our own spinning tops, and we looked at some that were made by another class.
listen to our finish song.
And then we signaled that the lesson was finished by doing the sign finish, by tidying up,
You can try it too. Finished.
and by getting very still and quiet, listening to the How Quiet Can You Be song.
Lots of good looking and listening. Thank you to Sahad, who's been looking as well. And thank you to Siv. Thank you to Finn, looking very relaxed.
If you're not used to watching youngsters with profound and multiple learning difficulties, you might be asking yourself the question, what exactly were those youngsters learning during that lesson?
My main focus in that lesson would have been students working on their individual targets, which may be attending to something or listening, visual skills, anticipation, things of that nature. But those were within a history lesson.
In the process of planning that lesson on toys, you actually visualised the fact that you were going to be moving with the school onto the same site as a mainstream school, and it was a way of bringing the two schools together to have lessons which were around the same sort of area.
When we were planning, we spoke with the deputy head and we asked her about her curriculum map, and on her curriculum map was Toys from the Past. And so we decided that we should, as a first sample, take that unit of work and see how we can develop it for our school and access our pupils to it, so that when we move to Little Stanmore, we can say we do the same, actually. So we have an opportunity here for children to share learning.
Woodlands were moving here on site, so we're going to be sharing the site. So it was trying to think of creative ways that we could have inclusion and an opportunity to work together for the two schools that weren't always seen as academic.
Working with colleagues from a mainstream school who bring all that they understand and know and can do to our work just adds a completely other dimension. And it just affects your thinking, really, and it's good.
Toys from the Past offered Little Stanmore and Woodland Special School the opportunity to plan their history curricula together. And it was an unusual request from a pupil at Little Stanmore which led to the Shakespeare project.
I wrote a letter asking if we could do Romeo and Juliet.
The workshop started through one of the children in my class writing a letter asking us to do extracurricular drama workshops after studying Romeo and Juliet in literacy. And I shared this with John at Woodlands, and we thought of how we could do it together.
It was a fairly impassioned letter about wanting to do more Shakespeare. And then I started to think about using this as a kind of catalyst, if you like, for doing some work with the staff and the children at Little Stanmore. I'd heard of Keith Park and his work. I made contact with Keith, and it took a life of its own from there, really. What do you think about the outline of the project?
I was asked to include a small group of children with very, very complex needs into a larger group activity. I hit upon the idea of using a text and just breaking it down and using it in call and response. One of the basic concepts around which these workshops are done is the circle. It's very comforting and reassuring for workshop participants because, to begin with, no one has to stand out. There's the comfort in anonymity. And as confidence gradually increases, people can be invited to go into the middle and play a part in directing an episode, if they wish to do so.
We can try and sign as well, okay?
Talk of peace, talk of peace. I hate the word.
What I've found is that more and more people want to go in to the middle and direct, as it were. Because the workshop itself is episodic, it's very easily learnable. Peers can help each other learn. I think enjoyment of stories, poetry and drama is something that is irrespective of disability and can be enjoyed by anyone.
Is enjoyment enough in a lesson? Is it enough reason for having a lesson rather than not?
Obviously, children are not going to learn unless they do enjoy what they're doing, and it obviously enhances and supports the learning process. But one of our underlying principles in developing what we did was this whole notion of allowing the particular population that we work with access to those experiences as a right in terms of the balance of their curriculum, but also looking at the whole issue as a continuum of learning.
Oh yeah. My only love. My only love. Sprung from my only hate. Sprung from my only hate.
The rhythm acts as a framework for communication skills.
That I must love. That I must love. Yeah.
It was found to be very successful, and we've just extended it and developed it ever since then. It's simply a matter of people feeling confident enough to go with it.
Excellent. Do you think this might be a good time to introduce the resonance board?
There's also something called a residence board, which is also a way of communicating. They lie down on the board, and when you bang it, they will be able to feel the vibrations.
A resonance board was originally developed for encouraging blind babies with multiple disabilities to move, because when the body moves on the board, the movement produces a resonance.
You want Sahan to come on? Okay, Ruksha is asking if Sahan can come on.
For a group such as this afternoon's, to have a resonance board in the middle enables the children with very complex learning needs to have some kind of vibrotactile stimulus. But it also provides an important communication aim because it acts as a joint visual attention. It focuses everyone's attention into the middle. So the resonance board performs a communicative function too.
Part 4. Tybalt and Mercutio have a fight. Thou art a villain! Thou art a villain! Villain am I none!
It's difficult for me to be a recorder of people's progress because trying to keep the whole thing going. But one of the children at one point went into the middle of the circle and stood on the resonance board, and his whole body posture spoke as if he was saying, this is me, look at me. Now this, in technical terms, is called declaring of self, which is a very early basic communication skill, which is extremely hard to teach in a formal situation, but in storytelling and drama and poetry, it's a situation that arises naturally.
Give it some welly, folks. Oh, Elohim! Oh, Elohim! Methinks I see thee.
To communicate, we mostly use sign language, or the Big Mac. The Big Mac is a machine that records speech. It's called a Big Mac because it looks a bit like a burger. It was designed like that so the children could smack the top and it wouldn't be difficult.
A voice output communication aid is a communication device that contains one or more pre-recorded messages. Participants who are switch users have the opportunity to initiate, maintain and close communication exchanges. Now, for a child with severe learning disabilities, these early communication skills are extremely important, but also ones that are extremely difficult to teach in a more so-called formal session because they don't relate to asking and answering questions.
It seemed to me there were also elements very much of social inclusion going on there, and I wondered how you think that the sort of work he was doing is about the behaviour of youngsters and how they perceive themselves and self-esteem and so on and so forth.
It started off in an academic way, if you like, for a reason, because I felt that if I approached a mainstream school with an academically based project, i.e. Romeo and Juliet and Shakespeare, that again we would have a commonality of language and they would have a view of what it was we were going to do. It also relates very much to their curriculum and their experiences as well. What happened as the session developed, though, was the relationships that came, if you like, as a consequence of that academic learning framework became very powerful, and those relationships affected everybody's behaviour. Everybody's behaviour in that room changed.
How, chop logic? How, chop logic? Proud and I thank you. Proud and I thank you. Proud me no prouds. Proud me no prouds.
The reason I have done workshops on Romeo and Juliet is because I feel that they have an intrinsic value of themselves.
Speak not, reply not.
But what teachers can do from mainstream schools and special schools is use the Romeo and Juliet workshop to fulfill their various objectives in English and drama and PSHE.
Romeo and Juliet.
So it is a very rich area for fulfilling national curriculum objectives.
Montague. Capulet.
But you needn't do Shakespeare, of course. You can use it with Benjamin Zephaniah or T.S. Eliot or Spike Milligan, anyone.
Talk of peace.
It fits in fully with the literacy curriculum in that we actually study Shakespeare in year 5, in year 6 and again in year 7. And it's a different way of interpreting a piece of work.
And thee. Coward. Gabane. Pakdan.
There were spin-offs to that in our PSHE lessons. There were lots of issues arose over how do children at Woodlands learn? How do they communicate? So one of the teachers at the school let us have access to a week's lessons plans, and we shared them with the class, and we spoke about how they could plan for children without speech or communication. We also spoke about disability. We spoke about human rights. So there were lots of spin-offs from the literacy that fitted in with the curriculum perfectly.
Were there any very unexpected consequences for individuals or for colleagues or within the work you've been doing recently?
Yeah, a young child from our school, one of the children in Jill's lesson, in fact, Ruksha, going in a taxi to Little Stanmore School. And once she knew she was going to Little Stanmore School, she recited a verse from Shakespeare in the back of the taxi, and the teacher was stunned.
And the taxi driver was
stunned. And she had the signing to go with it. She was sitting there calling him a villain. It's just fantastic feedback.
So you're looking at a sort of dynamic process which will affect everybody, including actually communication between parents, teachers, home and school, and so on and so forth, if it gets moving.
Absolutely. It's a journey, and it's going to be a long journey, but I think the kind of curriculum that we're devising, the kind of access, the kind of differentiation, and the principles that are underpinning the drive for our curriculum development should support everybody along that journey.
Have there been any particular difficult points or issues that you've had to deal with along the way?
In a given school day and in a given period of time, it is difficult. Our staff meetings have changed as a consequence of this work, because they are now very much conversations more so about learning, if you like, and specifically learning around this curriculum model. So out of every difficulty, or most difficulties, there does come a benefit, but I wouldn't be telling the truth if I didn't say there were times when I just couldn't see my way forward in terms of the development that we're doing.
Yeah, and I think also with the whole sort of communication being fed now into the curriculum, and I'm sure that's just only going to keep developing, the evaluation is going to presumably completely change, and the people involved in the evaluation process will probably change, and all of that will become very different, and that again knock-on effect to the planning. So it's just a revolving process.
The DFES has recently published a package of materials on learning in the primary school and the examples of practice drawn from around the country. And they've chosen to include the Romeo and Juliet workshop from New Woodland School and Little Stanmore School to demonstrate that pupils with and without learning disabilities can learn together. And inclusion need not necessarily mean locational inclusion or social inclusion, but actually academic inclusion.
You like this school? You like this school?
Children come into this school in the morning and they'll see me and they'll do an insult, a Shakespearean insult sign to me, because that's their physical demonstration of memory that they've been included. And you know, what more could you ask for, really?
Everybody would like to grab hold.
Before I went to Woodlands, I felt nervous and scared. Nervous because I didn't know how to interact with children with disabilities, and scared because I didn't know how to react with them.
The communication was hard, but then gradually got easier. I felt scared at first, but then I was normal.
The Romeo and Juliet redone was called Call and Response. The teacher was funny and kind.
I did have a favourite. His name is Paddy.
I enjoyed Romeo and Juliet. I'm glad that I wrote the letter because we get to meet the Woodland School children and the teachers.
Everybody help me! Everybody help me!